Good afternoon. My name is Liz Getzel, and today my colleague, Prohn, and I will discuss a 3-year study funded by the National Science Foundation on STEM as a viable career option for GI Bill recipients. We felt it was important to talk a little bit about the purpose of today's presentation. We will be discussing a study that has outcomes similar to results of other research on barriers that exist for GI Bill recipients, in particular veterans seeking college degrees, and the focus today is especially in STEM fields. We will discuss results that show disability is negatively associated with STEM participation, and we'll discuss further research needed in the field. These particular areas that we'll be touching on are very important for us to have a better understanding of what services, supports, and how we can better serve veterans with disabilities on college campuses, and in particular, having them participate and fully participate in STEM programs. The study is a collaboration between VCU's Rehabilitation Research and Training Center and the state's approving agency, SAA, for Veterans Education and Training of the Virginia Department of Veterans Services. SAA is responsible to ensure access and quality instruction, appropriate administration, and fair and equitable practices for every veteran and eligible person who enters a Virginia SAA-approved program. SAA played a very important role in the development and implementation of the online survey. We had representatives that served on our technical work group. We communicated often with them about where we were with the study, and they played a critical role in helping us to identify the potential respondent pool for our survey. And then we were able to disseminate the survey through school certifying officials at 2- and 4-year public institutions across Virginia. In Virginia, there are a number of veterans and military active individuals and their dependents. We are the 4th in the country in terms of veterans using their benefits, and this is data based on fiscal year 2014. There are over 1,000 institutions that have been approved which have been approved to provide training to veterans. As you can see, well over $800 million of GI Bill payments are being made to Virginians. And between 2007 and 2014, there was a 194% increase in Virginia veterans and dependents using their GI Bill benefits. So this is a number of individuals and a substantial increase of those trying to take advantage of the GI Bill in order to further their education. We had a number of steps in terms of how we prepared for the online survey and the questions that were developed and how we approached obtaining information through the survey. We had a technical work group that was very, very active throughout the process of dissemination, development, and implementation of the survey. This group was comprised of STEM faculty, career center staff, disability support services staff, veterans with disabilities, certifying officials, military student services staff, and we had several statisticians that were part of the group to provide this input throughout the course of the study. The first step that we took was to hold stakeholder interviews. It was very important to us to conduct these interviews in the development of survey questions. We conducted 30 interviews, and they were completed with certifying officials, career center staff, STEM faculty, veterans with disabilities who were in STEM, and dependents receiving GI Bill benefits. The reason that we collected this information is we wanted to make sure that we were looking at the full scope of issues or concerns or information that we wanted to collect through this process and really hone in on some of the important areas that are impacting the decisions of GI Bill recipients and dependents in pursuing STEM and persisting in STEM, sort of that initial decision to go into that degree and then persisting thereafter. It was also important for us because, as I'll talk in a few minutes, the pool, the respondent pool that we were pulling from, as with other states, the SSA does not break down either veterans or military active or dependents. There's no breakout by disability. So we were really targeting a subpopulation within the larger pool and use that for comparison purposes of individuals with disabilities as opposed to others without disabilities. But we wanted to make sure that through the online survey process, we were able to have those individuals completing the survey feel comfortable in responding as to whether they did have a disability. And so we really wanted to make sure that the language was appropriate so that the respondents did feel comfortable in responding to those particular questions. So after the stakeholder interviews, then we went through the process and an extensive literature review as well. And this study really builds on some of our work that we've done previously with veterans, and we were very aware of some of the issues and concerns and some of the institutional factors that sometimes play into whether a veteran or a military active person does then transition into college and pursue a degree. So we developed the survey questions, went back to our technical work group, and they went through the questions again to make sure for clarity and also whether the length of it and the scope and what we were hoping to achieve, and they gave us very, very thorough feedback. Once we went back and made some revisions based on what the technical work group had given us, we piloted the study with the survey, we piloted the survey with veterans with disabilities to give us some feedback about how the questions were phrased, how long it took them to complete the survey, and to give us some feedback about the questions. And in particular, some of the questions, there were two specific questions that dealt with disability and what they felt in terms of how we had worded that. We did make some changes based on the pilot and then finalized the survey, had it online, and the results then, as they came in, we began to analyze. We did work with the SSA, the state approving agency, in terms of sending reminders, and the survey was available in multiple formats, so individuals who felt more comfortable emailing or doing something, we handled that totally through our programmer so that we ourselves, the request could come in through the programmer who then could send out a hard copy or however, whatever format that was requested. So we wanted to make sure that the survey was totally accessible to all individuals. We also wanted to make sure that we really understood more information behind what the questions ask. And so we conducted follow-up interviews or triangulation of the data, if you will, to really get a fuller picture of veterans, military active individuals, as well as dependents, as to what their experiences have been about their decision-making, STEM, the use of services on campus, and those types of questions. So we really wanted to go more in depth. Individuals at the end of the survey, after they completed it, were given the opportunity to volunteer and sign up to have a follow-up interview. And this also was done separate from the survey so that confidentiality was maintained. So they would go to another screen to fill out information if they volunteered to participate in the interviews. 29 follow-up interviews were done, and they expanded on some of the questions that we had in the survey that we really wanted to get an even richer data source, if you will, and to provide definitely a complete picture of their experiences. Our survey design, we wanted to make sure that it was doable, that it would not take a great deal of time on the part of the respondent. The average time to complete the survey was about 10 minutes. There were multiple response pathways based on STEM and disability status, meaning if you identified that you had a disability, you went into a path to talk about your experiences and how your perceptions were based on your disability or your career path or your experience in the military, and then those that also that said yes to STEM or no, they had decided not to go into STEM. So there were multiple ways that data was collected through the survey based on respondent answers. There were a series of multiple choice questions that were designed. We collected demographics, choice of STEM majors, the use of on-campus services and supports, and how that, the frequency of that and their satisfaction with those types of services. Their reasons for choosing STEM, what went behind sort of their thinking about selecting STEM as a major. And also factors that influence decisions not to select a STEM major. So we really wanted to see what went into sort of the decision making to go into STEM and what those experiences were like, and then the decisions not to and what those were based on. The pool of GI Bill recipients, and we're looking at individuals who are veterans, military, active military personnel, dependents with or without disabilities. Again, this pool was of 19,000 at the time of the study of GI Bill recipients that were identified through the state agency as attending 2- and 4-year institutions in Virginia. Again, as I had said, the state approving agency did not collect information on the number of recipients that with disabilities that would have identified as having a disability, which is consistent with what we were finding across the country. So it was very critical that the survey was crafted and designed in such a way that we could then have individuals identify as part of their process of going through the survey. We, after numerous efforts, working closely with the state approving agency and having emails sent as reminders to certifying officials to, again, send out the link to potential participants on their respective campuses, we had 1,495 surveys were received, which is a response rate of 7.86. We really worked very hard to try to get the highest response rate we could. We looked in the literature, did an extensive review of the literature just to get an idea of what the response rates for studies that were comparable to methods that we were using that were conducted with the population that we were trying to reach, and found that this study response rate does fall within the range of other studies that we reviewed. Interestingly enough, most studies did not provide response rates in their published articles, but of the ones that we did find, it was a range of between 6 to 22% was found. So we really, again, tried multiple ways. We used incentives for individuals to participate in the survey. as well as sending out reminders, ticklers, if you will, and we were able to achieve this response rate. So when we're looking at what factors that we are examining or we're examining in this study, we have the GI Bill recipients, if you will, with disabilities enrolled in STEM fields sort of in the center. That is what we were looking at. That was the core of what the study was about. And what we were then looking at in some of the four corners, if you will, the STEM education perception, you know, why someone decided to pursue STEM or not, what were those factors, what were the influences that went into these types of decisions, academic preparedness or preparation. We were looking at how did the military experience or other types of experiences in your life contributed to either your success in STEM, or the decision to enter STEM as a viable career. One thing that we looked at very closely in terms of military transitions, if you will, the university factors during this transition, what services and supports were used on campus, or other institutional factors that contributed. Their experiences, maybe taking some STEM classes, or their experiences with faculty, experience of the university's outreach to have them come to their university, and just a number of factors that could contribute to this transition. And we wanted to look at other factors that we felt were important, which is the other corner, which is disability status and type, and how did this affect an individual's success in STEM courses, or their decision, they're choosing the path, if you will, in STEM that they wanted to take in terms of coursework. So those were really some of the very critical areas that we, to summarize sort of what we were looking at and what we were trying to achieve through the survey, through the interviews, the triangulation of the data that we did after the data was collected and reviewed what responses and what we received in terms of data. And this sort of summarizes, if you will, some of the main areas of emphasis that we were studying. So I will now turn over the presentation to my colleague, Seb Prohn, who will discuss some of the results of our findings in this study.
I'm Seb Prohn, and I'll be talking a little bit about the results from the survey. To better serve the GI Bill recipients, we wanted to try to understand the population a little bit better. And the survey provided a little slice of that population. The post 9/11 GI Bill recipients are commonly, but really not exclusively, veterans. Because after 90 days of service, one can begin receiving partial benefits from the GI Bill. Those in reserve, National Guard, or active duty had the potential to be students. Moreover, the post 9/11 GI Bill permits one to transfer their entitlements to a spouse or to their dependents. So we wanted to make sure that we considered these populations as well. Overall, as the chart suggests, the data were not equally representative of all GI Bill recipients. To a certain degree, when we talk about GI Bill recipients in this survey, we're talking about student veterans, because the number of student veterans responding to the survey greatly influenced the shape of the data. You may have also noticed that the percent column of the chart adds up to greater than 100%. Respondents were permitted to claim concurrent or multiple identities. As you might have guessed, some dependents have never served, while other dependents have served or continue to serve currently. To better explain the way the categories crossed over, let's take one look at one category of family members. Family members were only constructed of about 53% people who claimed that identity only, so only family member. But the rest of the group of people who responded as family members that included active duty veterans and people who have never served, also claimed those identities on top of family member. So for the purposes of our analysis, anyone who claimed veteran as an identity, we consider that a primary identification. And many of the analyses we did, we actually coded veteran and non-veteran in just a binary fashion. But our focus for the purposes of this presentation are really GI Bill recipients in general. We know that nationally about 12% of active duty, we know that nationally about 15% of active duty personnel were comprised of women. A study of about 800,000 college records of veterans who went to college between 2002 and 2013 reported that women made up about 21% of student veterans. But in our sample, we see that our GI Bill's recipients were comprised of about 35% women. And this is a number that's considerably greater than those of active duty and student veterans alone. And still, the odds were about 4.23 times greater that an individual identifying as a man compared to a woman would be a veteran. And that in general, men made up about 46% of the group. And an additional 18% didn't really identify their gender. Remembering that the respondents to the survey were primarily veterans and that student veterans tend to be older than non-veterans, it shouldn't come as any surprise that only about 33% of the individuals responding to the survey were under the age of 22 or 22 years old. And the rest of the 2/3 of the respondents to the survey were over the age of 23 or 23 years old. We also discovered that the vast majority of GI Bill respondents in Virginia were identified as Caucasian. About 15% were African American, followed by Asian and Native American respondents. Also, the majority of respondents did not identify as Latino or Hispanic. And while the aforementioned demographics are useful for better understanding tailoring for specific subgroups, such as women veterans who were African American and older than their peers, we sought to best understand what it means in general to access GI Bill support and have a disability, and how that affects college participation and STEM participation. To do this, we needed to decide on a variable that was useful for capturing disability. The survey asked respondents disability rating. Veteran Affairs rates a disability or cumulative disabilities on a scale from 0 to 100%. Using 10-point increments, the VA ranks closer to 100% those conditions that are deemed to be more incapacitating or require greater supports. The 2013 American Community Survey conducted by the U.S. Census found that about 18.4% of veterans had a disability rating. 37% of the respondents in this survey, however, reported having a disability rating greater than 0. The problem with this measure is that, as you might have guessed, more than 90% of those reporting a disability rating were veterans. And because we're interested in GI Bill recipients in general, we needed another way to measure disability. A more inclusive way to capture disability was by allowing respondents to self-report whether they had received a diagnosis for one or more of 13 disability categories listed on the survey. Some of the categories were very broad, such as orthopedic injury or a mental health condition. And others were more specific, such as amputations, burns, or autism. We found that 43% of those who responded to the question claimed to have been diagnosed with at least one disability. The sacrifice of using this more inclusive way to capture a disability diagnosis was that only about 2/3 of the respondents answered this specific question. Whether or not this was an artifact of the survey design is unclear. By using this method to measure respondents' disability status, we also discovered that there was an association between veteran status and disability diagnosis. In fact, we found that the odds of having a disability were 3 times greater for veterans compared to non-veteran GI Bill recipients. And also please recall that veterans make up approximately 60% of the respondents in this survey. So to a certain degree, when we describe the way that disability impacts the college experiences, we should consider how these experiences are probably skewed a little bit towards those experiences of student veterans. GI Bill respondents were affiliated with a total of 35 institutions of higher education in Virginia. 21 of those were community colleges and 14 were 4-year schools. A large number of these respondents came from 5 institutions: Tidewater Community College, Thomas Nelson Community College, Virginia Tech University, the University of Virginia, and Virginia Commonwealth University. As you can see on this table, most of the respondents were full-time students at 4-year schools pursuing bachelor's degrees. Now the picture begins to shift a little bit when we isolate specific pockets of respondents. For instance, when we look at GI Bill recipients who also had disabilities, we find that instead of bachelor's degrees, the odds were about 2 times greater that they were pursuing associate's degrees. And as you might imagine, associate's degrees are commonly earned at 2-year schools, in which the odds were about 2 times greater that they were at these 2-year schools. The odds were also slightly greater that those with disabilities attended school part-time. In other words, compared to the total population in this survey, the college experience was pretty different for those with disabilities. And recall that the majority of GI Bill recipients were older than their classmates and may have identified as non-traditional students. And that's a population that has been historically served at community and technical schools. While college experiences in general were of interest to us, especially those experiences of students with disabilities, we also wanted to know what factors influenced GI Bill recipients' decisions to pursue or not pursue STEM majors. The primary reasons that GI Bill recipients gave to choose STEM was that they were personally interested in STEM fields, but they also really liked the employment opportunities and the salary projections associated with STEM careers. As one respondent in the post-survey interview said, the primary factor was future employment opportunities and likelihood of employment upon the completion of my degree. I have somewhat of a personal aptitude, but I'm interested in it because the main focus for me is employment opportunities. And those who were not interested in STEM felt that STEM fields did not align with their personal interests and goals. But they also lacked knowledge about STEM. One person said, "I lack knowledge about STEM. Education-wise, I was not educated on new technology." And another similarly mentioned that I was never educated about STEM. In fact, I had never heard about STEM until I took this survey. I had to choose a major and get started, and I made that decision on my own. It is possible that I would have chosen STEM if I would have received some more advising. No one was there to tell me about it. I wanted to help people, and social sciences seemed right up that alley. We also know that a few other elements set STEM majors apart from the greater field. For example, they were more likely to be white, and they were more likely to be full-time students. They felt that their prior education had adequately prepared them to pursue STEM in college, and they were open to using assistive technology in STEM classes. And proportionately, they were diagnosed with fewer hearing impairments. But what really surprised us was that 42% of non-STEM majors had once considered STEM. Keep in mind that many more individuals in this study were not STEM majors than were. But we wonder what could have been done to provide enough encouragement to these individuals who were interested to tilt the scale towards attempting STEM. When we think about other life changes and behavior changes, all begin with consideration. And those who consider are more likely to act. We need to do a better job of working with those who are considering STEM, but then choose otherwise. To a certain degree, the discussion of disability and STEM participation overlapped. And while that it's true in general, we did not find an association between disability and STEM participation, that finding did not hold when we examined STEM participation across specific disabilities. Most notably, for those GI Bill recipients who said that they had a mental health condition, the odds were 3 times less that those with a mental health condition compared to those without mental health conditions would be pursuing a STEM major. We're unable to tell for sure if disability actually affects STEM participation or if the perceptions of disability may create larger obstacles. Interviews with GI Bill recipients encouraged us to start asking such questions. One respondent said, "I have PTSD and knee and feet injuries. Regarding jobs that I could achieve after school and thinking about my career, my disability could affect STEM success, especially the PTSD." In this case, the respondent's perception of his or her own disability created a barrier. But in other cases, it was the perceptions of others that discouraged STEM participation. As another participant said, "A VA rep said that the situation with my back and knees that they didn't think that any degree would be good for me other than business. They talked me out of a lot of things that I wanted to do. They said that with my disabilities, I wouldn't be able to do technology, cooking, or other fields because I wouldn't be able to stand for long periods of time. And they talked me out of those fields." As has been said in the psychology field, and which by the way is a STEM field, over the past 100 years, if we believe it to be real, it's real in its effects. Or even as Henry Ford said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're probably right. The impact of disability attitudes and perceptions seems to still create obstacles for participation, whether that be in the workplace or in STEM fields. Moving forward, we want to better understand some more research that can make sure we better understand GI Bill recipients, those with disabilities in the university. So we need to know more about the relationship between disabilities and non-traditional student status. What we found is that there's a time bind for individuals who are considered non-traditional students and going to college. So they're more likely to have dependents, they're more likely to be married, and they're more likely to have jobs. And all of those can impact the time that one can spend on campus and engaged in the academic environment. So we want to better understand the relationship between being a non-traditional student and how that might impact the college experience. But we also really need to expand our survey pool to a national audience. And one main critical reason for pursuing a larger sample is that we need to get more respondents who are GI Bill recipients who are also in the STEM fields. So we can do this with a national sample, but we also can get a better idea of how much STEM people have had access to. So we might be able to understand how perceptions of college and the college experience might change for those who have had 1 or 2 STEM classes versus those who have taken 1 or 2 years worth of STEM specific courses in a STEM major. We're also very interested in understanding the experiences of dependents of GI Bill recipients, and especially those dependents who have disabilities, and we're understanding what support needs those individuals need to pursue STEM degrees. Finally, we need to understand the way that perceptions of GI Bill recipients with disabilities really can affect their decisions to pursue STEM careers and STEM majors, and to what extent that their disabilities play a role in how these decisions are made. As we saw in the previous slide, one's perceptions and attitudes about oneself, but also the perceptions of others in their community, may greatly influence the degrees that these individuals pursue.